A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby, and an opportunity today to meet the new State Director for Western Australia, Jacob Hill. Hey, Jacob, welcome along to 2020.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Neil.
Jacob, how long is it now you've been in your role? An opportunity today to introduce you to listeners all over the nation, but what was your story in coming to this point where you're now State Director for WA?
So 6 months I've been in the role now. So starting to feel like I've found my feet, close or starting to find my feet. My background is I pastored a local church for the past 15 years. And in that I was always, most of the time, bivocational, where I sort of always was part of social community service works. So Adult and Teen Challenge was a big part of the work I've done for the last sort of 20 years, and more recently homelessness with Uniting WA, which is Uniting Care. I think most way around the country, but yeah, so that's been for the lot.
Wow, working with Adult and Teen Challenge and in areas of homelessness and pastoring a church for 15 years. You know what there is in some sense there, you've had your feet on the ground, you've been mixing it with people who are in huge need in WA. And that pastor's heart obviously shines through there. And then taking on a role, the State Director for the Australian Christian Lobby, because in sometimes now you're obviously interested in how you get reform happening and politics and where the church fits in all of that. How's that all been mixed together for you?
It's actually been in answer to prayer. Well, I've been familiar with the Australian Christian Lobby for a very long time now. And I've always, admired the work that we do, and just sort of contributed however I've been able to. But where I really see it was when I was, because I was offered the role, and when I was contemplating it, one of my colleagues said, "You've been like an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff for so long. Now's your chance to get to the top of that cliff and help build a fence." And as a dad of 3 young kids, it's been right off the front of my radar is, seeing terrible policy coming through and agendas that just do not align with what we know is God's best. And then also those feet on the ground, as you're saying, with policy, as far as the social aspects, where not only the immediate things we see, like the way that perhaps homelessness is handled, or recovery, addiction recovery is handled, but the systemic things that really precede it, where basically if you're able to do a lot more to support family, you are going to cut out a lot of the need that we have for addiction recovery and homelessness services, where for me as a dad, where I see the biggest breakdown is in dads. I think if we're able to support dads, be amazing dads, making the family a healthy, vibrant experience for young people.
Well, so much in your experience there that when you come to the role that you have now, and so many will just relate so positively to the thought, that analogy of, you've been the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. You've been picking up those who are homeless. You've been picking up those who've got addictions. You've recognised that fatherhood is so important, and there are a lot of things that undermine all of those issues and cause there to need to be a whole lot of ambulances waiting at the bottom of the cliff. But being at the top of the cliff, building a fence, and the connection here to how you actually engage with community and engage with the political process, because it's laws that are changing that are making all of those sorts of things necessary, so many ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. When you're standing now at the top of the cliff and you've got your eyes on what's happening in state government in Western Australia and federal government, the issues that are there. What is it comes to mind for you as the areas of focus that you think are ones that you'll be, more focused on?
Well, you've got the glaringly obvious aspects when you're looking, forwards. You're looking at education has to be, you're shaping the generations. Then you've got to take even a step further back. It's like, well, the generations have to be born to actually be able to progress. So we're looking at, you've got like life issues. Sanctity of life is probably a massive one, and the education system and the ability of parents to be able to parent their own children, which is, you're talking about being undermined. There is people actively trying to interrupt parents from being able to parent their own children and decide their own children's educational pathways. And so they're pretty fundamental. They're the obvious, the low-hanging fruit, if you like. The low-hanging doesn't make it easy to take off the vine.
And education's so important, but as you say, the issues around life and the fact that abortion levels are so high, you might be wondering where the next generations are coming from. Well, right now, I guess all sorts of people in federal politics are all looking towards immigration for where the numbers are coming from. But yes, so there's some campaign issues that you're in the fight for, rolling up your sleeves. And in Western Australia, are there special things in Western Australia that you've got your eyes on as you've been surveying the needs there?
Yeah, well, just yesterday had there was a Rally for Life, which was a memorial for the 220,000 plus babies that have been killed in the womb legally since the late 90s, when abortion was legalised in Western Australia. And there was 1,200 people there on a Saturday afternoon, which, just goes to show that there's people, it matters to people. So we've got, there's a really good, we had 5 sitting members of the upper house who are pro-life and overtly pro-life, and that was across 3 different parties, including the 2 longest-serving members, the longest-serving member of the Labor Party and the longest-serving member of the Liberal Party. They both spoke at this rally. So that's very, very much front and centre at the moment, and where we've also got looking into the conversion therapy. That's got to be something that we do know that's very high on the priority of certain lobby groups to get the similar legislation to what we've seen in Victoria and New South Wales pushed through into Western Australia. So that's very much on our front burner as far as, knowing what we need to be on top of, and we need to be presenting sound argument as to why that's not a good idea for our state.
And special honour to you here, Jacob, because you might find yourself right in the mix there, and you've got your own story to tell, because when that conversion therapy comes in around the different states, its tendency is to criminalise parents and criminalise people in church for standing with a biblical ideal around marriage and family. And so, interestingly, with your background as a pastor, you're right there in the mix, and you'd realise that if that battle is to be fought in WA, at least you can bring a dimension there of your own church experience and your own family experience to bear on the whole thing.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest strengths that I've seen coming into this space is that background of church ministry, where there is that whole mindset of the separation of church and state, where the church needs to mind its business, the state minds its business, and never the two shall meet type deal. And what I've seen moving into this cross section of political activism, if you want to call it that, political lobbying, and with a Christian, from a Christian perspective, I've seen a frustration in the lobbying community with the engagement of churches and pastors in that space. And having been a pastor for the past, I still am. My wife, she flies the ship, so to speak, but I'm still got my name on the door as a senior pastor as well. I understand the dynamics that pastors have to navigate as well. And so what my probably the biggest piece that I see, opportunity that I have in this role is to find the sweet spot, if you want to call it that, where the churches are able to have a lot larger role in advocacy, particularly politically. And I really see the ACL as being able to really increase our ability to be that voice for the church. So what I've seen is this frustration that the lobby groups have had, where it's almost they feel like perhaps the churches don't care or the pastors don't care. But where I know for a fact that's not the case, is the pastors care just as much, but they're a lot more localised in their thinking. They are very much caring for the one. Then Jesus left the 99 for the one, and they're very much sitting in that space. Whereas with the political active, lobbying and being active, it's the broader view, and we need to find a way of get the church being involved without damaging the one, and that's the opportunity I see.
I think it's a great perspective to think about pastors who are locally focused and the ministry to the one. And sometimes we tend to think that pastors don't necessarily or shouldn't have an affinity for engagement in politics. But you're an exception there. And I think, and from my perspective, I can see a real upswing in the number of Christian pastors who are interested in the political space. But, when you get to this concept of separation of church and state and how that's sometimes misinterpreted, or it's interpreted one way by a more secularized people, but then somehow or other it hasn't captured the imagination, and Christian leaders haven't necessarily understood that the church is the one that should be protected by that ruling of a separation of church and state, not the opposite way around. It's not about protecting the state from the church. The church is there to be the conscience of a nation, isn't it? A conscience 100%. Of your state. And so how can you be the conscience without the engagement? So what are your thoughts here? I mean, are you seeing this too when you're talking to pastors, when you're talking to politicians? How do you judge what's happening with people's feelings about separation of church and state these days?
Well, I think that we know legally that the separation of church and state is actually a mechanism set up to protect churches from overreach from the government. And that's in our constitution, that's how it's set up. And even, historically, that's what it's been about. Where I think what's happened is people sort of get maybe perhaps watch too many movies and have that dark, digging through the dark ages where, the Robin Hood, where the bad guys are the cardinals, or the church, where the church has taken positions of absolute authority and overreached. And people have tied that idea of church and state to that era when, that's just got nothing to do with the conversation. But I guess the concern is that the church is trying to push for some sort of supreme, authority, but where that's just not like that conversation is, that's not our context. The context is we're in a totally different age where we've got elected officials, we've got churches that are set up by denomination or non-denomination, where you've got the collectives, and where I'm seeing the wake up is where I think to a large extent the pastors have been operating in good faith, believing that the government are respecting that separation of church and state. And now they're seeing, particularly with these conversion bills, sort of being pushed in, they're seeing that the state is very much trying to get inside the church and control the church. And I believe that is got quite a lot to do with why we're seeing an uptick in engagement, because it's quite clear now to pastors that the church, like the government, is very, very interested in getting inside their doors changing how they do things, who they can hire, how they run their schools, and they have got no intention of staying out of the church. And we're not saying the government in its entirety, but there's definitely strong elements within the government who have that agenda.
And so you've got this agenda, haven't you? And it won't be every individual who's leading a state government or a federal government, but there are going to be those in there that do have the agenda of we're here to control the church. Church looking like it's out of control needs to be brought under control. And as you rightly, I think, say, when you're talking about the conversion therapy legislation already in play in a number of states around Australia and could be on the agenda for Western Australia, this is something that needs to be opposed because this is what creates the inroads for the state to endeavour to coerce and control the church. And if you've got that, then the church is not free to be able to do the ministry and bring the good news of the gospel in the way that it is if it's not under this sort of coercion from the state. So worth fighting for, Jacob.
Yeah, 100%. My largest concern with her is it's not subtle. Like there's you'd probably be very familiar with being politically savvy. The Communist Handbook, the strategy. There's a comment where the big picture is break down families, shut down churches, take private property off individuals. Where we're seeing particularly the religious freedom, the challenge at the moment is that where you have to, at the moment, churches, religious institutions like schools, charities and things like that have the ability to hire according to faith, which means, we're a Christian company or a Christian charity. We have the right to hire people who align with our values, and that predominantly being Christian, and they're living a Christian lifestyle. Whereas in this, the big push at the moment is that schools would not be able to hire according to faith, where it would only be the religious education teacher, the principal, and the chaplain that would be able to be preferred according to faith. And what we see is part of that strategic push. The communist agenda is what's called the long march through the institutions, which is where they're talking about getting into the educational system and basically from the inside out, turning it from a faith-based like a faith-based team really to a team that is secular, and not in the actual word secular, but as in non-Christian. Let's just call it that.
Yeah. Hey, Jacob, great meeting you, and just to take an opportunity today to hear your heartbeat as to what's driving you. And no doubt listeners in WA will feel like they know you a little bit better now, and certainly identifying those challenging issues around church and state and what it means to have a healthy separation of church and state, which is protection for the church to be able to do those things that the church needs to be free to do if you're going to remain a free state, a free nation. Jacob Hill is the new Australian Christian Lobby State Director for Western Australia, and great to be able to hear his heartbeat today. To connect with Jacob, you can do so through the website acl.org.au. That's the website for the Australian Christian Lobby, acl.org.au. Hey, Jacob, thanks so much for sharing your insights and your heartbeat with us today on 2020.
Real pleasure, Neil. Thanks so much for having me. And God bless you guys and the work you do.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.